And it's also, he's got 8 stages. He actually added a 9 when he was quite old, but typically he's thought of as 8 stages. And what he suggests is that each stage of life has a crisis, a psychosocial crisis that has to be resolved. So I'm going to start at the bottom. I don't always shape this up as the best as I want to, but I'll start at the top because I'm afraid otherwise I'll run out of room. So the first stage that he says, the first crisis that a person goes through the moment they're born is the crisis of trust versus mistrust. And it happens because as infants, all we know are our emotions. An infant cannot think. If an infant cries because it's hungry, it can't think to itself, oh, I can see mom's just busy finishing up her paper, so I'll just wait a minute. Like, no. The infant cries, it's hungry, it has no way of overriding that emotion of maybe even fear that comes when an infant is hungry. Completely dependent. And since the infant cannot think through any other solution, then it's very dependent on the caregiver reaction. And so as long as the caregiver is responsive to the needs of the infant, most of the time, when that infant needs something, someone is there, then that infant learns trust and eventually develop the attribute of hope. So if there is a responsive caregiver, most of the time, the infant learns to trust other people, and this stays with that infant through its life. When that infant is 25, that basic foundation that they can trust people is still with them. So trust versus mistrust, dependent on the responsiveness of the caregiver to an emotionally vulnerable infant, and it brings about the attribute of things like hope, like a generally positive view of what's going to happen. Alternately, if the caregiver isn't responsive, there's someone who's raising a baby alone and maybe is going through depression and there's no one helping and supporting that person, and that person cannot respond, then that infant might develop a tendency to distrust others in their environment. And that's something that they would need to work on then throughout their life, maybe learning to trust at a later stage. This is Erikson's framework. There might be other ways to look at it, but that's, and by the way, this stage takes place, they would say, birth to 18 months. The second stage of development is autonomy versus shame and doubt. And autonomy just means the ability to act independently. And it takes place in the ages of like 18 months to 3 years when the child, the most characteristic thing that's happening is toilet training, something over which the child has total control. No matter how many times you put them on the potty, you can't make them go, right? So that's the child's first assertion of will. But the 2-year-old, what's their favorite word? It starts with an N and it ends with an O. No, right? That's an assertion of will, right? So parents have to navigate this, right? They have to find just the right balance between giving the child appropriate choices. You know, do you want to wear your red shirt or your blue shirt, right? But not letting the child control the world. Parent needs to find balance. And if the parent finds that balance, then the child develops a sense of autonomy, and that leads them to get a nice sense of will. So if the balance is appropriate, the child develops a sense of will, like the strength to take I don't want to confuse it with the next stage, but like a determination. You know, they can act on their own independently. And if not, you know, if they have no sense of anything in their world and they're just getting reprimanded and there's no way for them to assert themselves, they might develop shame and doubt, and that might characterize them through their lifetime. They might have to work that out later. The third stage, taking place during the preschool years, is initiative versus guilt. And we can think of a child taking the initiative, just meaning that they are acting on their own, like they're taking the initiative to get on their own clothes. You know, they're taking the initiative to draw a picture for mom. They're taking the initiative to make themselves a snack or go in, you know, the fridge and get something. They're taking their independent action, right? The preschool years, let's say 3 to 5. And as long as the parents, like, usually when a child at 3-year-old takes initiative, it results in a big mess, right? And so the parents, again, have that delicate road to travel of appreciating the initiative of the child, while at the same time teaching them to do it more neatly, right? And as long as there's appropriate responses from the caregivers, then this child develops a sense of purpose. Later on in life, when they're in college, when they're adults, something's wrong in the world around them, they can take initiative and make a change, right? They can step up. The 4th stage, we're going through these fast, but trust me, we're going to revisit all of these later on, is industry versus shame and versus inferiority. And this is in the elementary school years, let's say 6 to 12. And by industry, we just mean hard work. Does their work pay off? If they're doing a chore, do they generally do it well? You know, is it acceptable? If their job is to clean the kitty litter box, do they do it? And do they find out that, okay, it's appreciated, it's valued? If they're in school and they're doing schoolwork, are they finding out that their hard work pays off? And, you know, as they work hard, they get decent grades, or, you know, their teacher compliments them. Does their hard work pay off? And if yes, the work pays off, then they develop a sense of competence. Not confidence, but competence, meaning that they learn that, well, if I work hard, I can accomplish things. Okay. Next, during the teen years, we have identity versus identity diffusion. Teens. And this is, you know how teenagers, they try on different masks, don't they? Maybe some of you, if I had seen you when you were 15, I would have been like, wow, because maybe you were wearing spiky purple hair and white makeup and black lipstick. I don't know, you know, but that's okay. You have to try on different masks. That's what this stage is about, finding out who you are. And if you don't explore, you never find out, right? And as long as that person tries on different masks, then they can develop a sense of identity fidelity. And that means they know who they are. They know what kind of friends they should have. They know what they like and dislike. They know about themselves. They're true to themselves. It's like an identity cohesion. Right? But if they never try on different identities, they might foreclose. They might never learn about aspects of themselves. Or they might just be lost forever with too many choices. So that's the teen years. Just a couple more, 8 stages as mentioned. Next, in young adulthood, we have intimacy versus isolation. And these are young adulthoods. Typically, he characterized them as like the 20s, maybe early 30s. And this is when typically people are finding their lifelong relationships. If they've built a nice foundation, they've learned they can trust people, they've learned they can act independently, take the initiative, they've learned that their hard work pays off, and they found out who they were, then they can form intimate relationships that result in the development of love. The formation of loving relationships that can put someone else first. And that leads to a nice place for the middle-aged years of generativity versus stagnation. And when I first learned this, when I was young, I mistook this on a test and wrote generosity. So a little generosity involved, but really it's about thinking of the next generation. It's about caring about the world beyond yourself. And if all of these went smoothly, then when you get to this stage, you know, you're going to be able to act on behalf of others, work things out in the community, create a teen center because you see that the teens have no place to go. Work to get people out voting because you think about it being important for the betterment of your world, or care for your grandkids, you know. Volunteer in a school, or even, you know, produce art that makes the community a better place. Generativity versus stagnation, where you're just kind of, you're not really thinking about anyone beside yourself and probably not very happy in those middle years. And finally, the last stage, as I mentioned, there is another stage, but typically that's not mentioned in here. It is integrity versus despair. And this is in old age. Integrity, like truth and honesty. And when this person who's old does their life review, looks back on it, do they look back and feel that they've been honest and true? They've made mistakes, but they've done their best. They've lived a good life. They're grateful. Or is it more this sense of despair that they wasted their life? Wisdom is the attribute. They can pass on wise tidbits to those who are younger and lead people because they've worked through all of these things. And the main reason I wanted to make sure and cover this today is because Erikson posits that these build on each other. Usually I would like to present this as sort of a staircase, that we learn to become complete beings by resolving the crisis of trust, the crisis of autonomy. But if we haven't resolved the crisis of trust, autonomy is harder. And if we haven't learned to be autonomous, how can we take the initiative and develop a sense of purpose? And if we haven't learned to develop initiative, how can we learn that our hard work pays off? How can we have the confidence to find ourselves? Find our identity. We don't know who we are. How can we have a decent, intimate relationship where we love freely and let ourselves be vulnerable? So these build on each other. And I want to present it that way. But then at the same time, I want to say, let's say one of us was unlucky enough that we weren't fortunate to have responsive caregivers at that very first stage. Maybe someone was in the hospital or depressed or, you know, all kinds of situations. Does that mean we're cursed and their whole life we might as well just give up? And the answer to that is no. What it means is that we're rich, complex human beings, and that we need to wisely go back and work through these earliest emotions and become aware of that fear that a person like that might feel in a relationship and work on it, right? That just means we work on ourselves. And that work often brings about a very, very deep, wise human being in the end. So they build on each other. It can be harder, but that work that we do on ourselves can make all the difference. It's 7:35. I'd like to invite us to take a break for 10 minutes. It's not very long, but we do have that research content, and that is how I framed our discussion. So I want to go through that with you a bit, okay? So I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes and come on back at that time. If you have questions, we'll take them before we move forward. Okay. Everyone, make sure you get up, walk around, look out the window, stretch, be kind to yourself. This has been an intense little